The next episode that we come to in Ulysses is called Nausicaa. This is the episode that triggered the obscenity trial. What happens in this episode, essentially, Mr. Leopold Bloom is going to be at the beach, Sandy Mount Strand, and he's going to see this young lady, Gertie McDowell, and he's going to masturbate to her as she exposes herself, showing underneath her dress. Why this chapter was singled out, there have been other issues, but I think maybe in some ways this is a little more accessible and easy to follow. I don't know. I think if you're looking for something shocking or scandalous nowadays, I think we've been bombarded with so much. You're not going to find much scandalous in this episode. The accessible style of this episode comes from it being based on Joyce doing imitation of really the worst literature writing of his day. I hesitate to call it literature, but the worst magazine stories, the worst, think of that erotic novel that Leopold Bloom picked up, The Sweets of Sin. This could well be that style of book, really sentimental, melodramatic, full of cliches and full of violations of that creative writing rule that you're supposed to show, not tell. So many times the narrator is going to be telling us things that should be shown, if they're shown at all, but done in really cliched, hackneyed phrases that are just, there's no way that you can take them seriously. The first part devoted to Gertie McDowell is not an internal monologue, but it may as well be in some sense, because we're going to get really close to Gertie's sense of the world and how she views things, not just because of the magazines and books like Sweets of Sin, but things like advertising. That's going to show up a lot in this episode. Since Joyce seems capable of writing in nearly any style, why should he choose to, quote-unquote, waste his talents to lampoon this style? I mean, actually, I say it's something that you might see in a magazine or a book like Sweets of Sin, but in reality, this is not. It's too... any reader, I think, at some point would realize that this is ridiculous, and I'll single out some of the lines that are just laughable. But in answer to why Joyce should use this style, I want you to consider one of my favorite TV shows, Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
All in all, she's a little off colour.
You shut your mouth, Liz.
No, you shut your mouth, Sanj. That was funny.
This is, I think, a great example of how doing something really bad can sometimes be really good. Joyce is going to have his tongue firmly in cheek whenever he's using this perspective of Gertie's. Let's jump back to the Odyssey for a second. Odysseus at sea, Poseidon's pissed off at him and he destroys his ship. Odysseus almost drowns, but the goddesses, some of them help him to kind of get washed up on this river. And this young lady, Nausicaa, and her handmaidens, they're at the river, I think, washing clothes, and I think they're naked, so I think they're bathing too. Odysseus also naked, and they come upon each other, so they're first at sight of each other. They're both naked, and she helps Odysseus. She takes him to her father. Oh, by the way, she's a princess. Her king father initially doesn't like Odysseus, but then he kind of comes around and he wants Odysseus to marry his daughter. They have like this banquet in which they talk about a legend from the Trojan War about Odysseus, and Odysseus is listening because they don't know he's Odysseus, but he kind of forces them to reveal who he is. So he tells the narration of his adventures that he's had since Troy, and eventually the king comes around and he's like, "Oh, you're Odysseus. I want to help you get home to your homeland. I'm going to give you some help with the ship and so on." And it does eventually lead to Odysseus getting back home. But I think this character of Nausicaa, this kind of young lady who falls in love with Odysseus, is what Joyce is working with here. Incidentally, the name Nausicaa means the burner of ships. The time is now 8 p.m. and it's unclear if when the episode begins the sun is still up, but by the end the sun will be down. It is that time of year in summer, and the location is Sandy Mount Strand, the beach that Stephen was moping along in episode 3, Proteus. The episode is going to begin with the introduction of this small group of young people. There is Gertie McDowell, who is, I'm going to say for now that she's about 21. We'll talk more about that soon. There's Sissy Caffrey, another, they seem like younger women than Gertie. Gertie seems like the oldest one. So Sissy Caffrey. Then there's Edie Boardman. Those are maybe teenage girls. And then there's also these twins, Tommy and Jackie Caffrey, who are the younger brothers of Sissy Caffrey. And then there's a young baby about 11 months old who is the younger sibling of Edie Boardman. For the first few pages or so, though, Gertie is almost invisible. We know that we refer to 3 girlfriends, but she doesn't really even show up until a few pages in, and it will be a very subtle entrance. She will be just sitting in the sand. And also slowly to enter the scene, although he may have been there all along, is Leopold Bloom. He is referred to as this almost exotic, foreign-looking gentleman because, again, remember, we're seeing this from Gertie's perspective. We're going to be entering Gertie's world after initially, like, we just see like the twins arguing on the beach and so on, but the shift will take place into Gertie's mind and her life. It's ruled by this sea of emotions. She seems to have had a painful breakup recently with a young man who, one of his key features is that he rides bicycles. We're also gonna get a lot of humorous details about her beauty regimen and her life in general. It's tempting to just see her as a cliche and not even a real person, but Joyce does insert some kind of more elements of realism. Her father gets drunk a lot and abuses the family. So these touches of realism may give you more of a sense of her as a real person, or maybe not. Maybe you'll see these also as kind of stock of like vaudeville or really low operas, like really cliched archetypes of how to make characters sympathetic. That's up to you. She will have fantasies of being swept off her feet by some exotic, maybe foreign gentleman, and Bloom, who she sees as she's sitting there like somewhere across the sand, is going to be close enough to that image to suit her fantasies. So as the other kids and the other women are going to go to look at the fireworks further down the beach, Gertie's going to stay behind, and she is going to be noticing that Bloom is watching her, and it's going to thrill her. So she will show him a glimpse of underneath her dress as he is masturbating and gets himself off in synchronization with the fireworks, no less. I said that Gertie will personify Nausicaa in some ways, the nymph princess who helps Odysseus, but I want to also, there's another idea I think that you can't miss, is that Gertie is identified very largely with the Virgin Mary, who there's going to be these transitions in the scene to this nearby church, Mary Star of the Sea, where what is going on there is a temperance retreat, which is, usually for drunk men who, we saw something similar in the short story Grace, where they would go and communicate how to avoid the dangers of alcohol and so on. So all you really need to know with that is that Joyce is using the Virgin Mary symbolism, connecting it with Gertie. Now, while the first half or so of the episode is devoted to Gertie's perspective, suddenly at some point we're going to shift, and it's you'll notice it, that you can't miss it. We're going to jump to Bloom's perspective, and the first thing that we learn is that as Gertie McDowell is going to walk away to join her friends, Bloom notices that she has a limp. She's limping with her leg, and this is going to make him feel it's going to change how he was perceiving the scene as well. Bloom's half of the chapter is an internal monologue, definitely, and it's going to be, I want to say it may be our last sustained internal monologue with Bloom in the book. I'm not 100%, and I'll try and keep that in mind as we read along, but it's going to be him similar to the other monologues we see of him. He's going to be remembering the past. He's going to be thinking about the present, kind of recovering from his orgasm, thinking about Gertie McDowell and the beach in general and his life in general, what he's going to do the rest of the night, all the usual things that we can expect. Not much action, though. He's just going to be sitting there and recovering. Bloom is going to have a lot to say about women in general, thinking about Gertie, also thinking about Molly and Boylan earlier in the day. These things he'll repeatedly talk about women as a general species, and it's a good counterpoint, I think, to Molly at the end of the book, in her monologue, she's going to say a lot about men. So that's the key points for this episode. I'm going to go now into my long detailed notes as I want to do.